Recording now. This is Joseph Schwartz, the founder of Movement Mantra and the developer of DNA, Dynamic Neuromuscular Assessment. And he has a couple of upcoming seminars, one in the Midwest and one on the East Coast. And we thought it might be helpful for all of you folks out there to hear a little bit about what DNA is and how it's a little bit different than other offerings out there. And I'm going to turn it over to Joseph.
Hey, friends. Thank you for taking the time in your day to come out and visit with us and have a listen to what I have to offer to y'all. One of the things I wanted to start with is, how did I get onto this adventure of somatics and being in the body and being a body worker and movement? And it really started in my 20s, and I was an avid rock climber, and I had a climbing fall in which I broke my talus. I took a 40-foot ripper on a route that I was putting up. And in the process of my own rehab, I discovered the affinity for this body of work. And I pursued it. That was over 30 years ago. I've been a body worker for over 25 years, and I've been practicing manual muscle testing for 24 years. And I have come to learn that there's some very specific things about manual muscle testing that may not be obvious. And it takes a little bit to come to those understandings. One of the things that I was really looking for when I started practicing was like, oh, this seems like such a long, arduous process of testing muscle to muscle to muscle. There has got to be a shortcut. And I discovered that shortcut. And within that, I also discovered that muscle testing needs to be redefined. Because actually, we're not at all testing muscles. We're testing the nervous system's ability to respond to movement. Muscle testing can have some negative connotations for our clients because they think that, one, it's like if the muscle test, quote, fails or they're unable to respond appropriately, that there's something wrong with them, that they're weak. Athletes are very tuned into this, that, oh, they need to win. They need to be strong. But in actuality, it's not about the muscles being strong nor weak, but it's really about the nervous system responding appropriately. And there's lots of different reasons why the nervous system wouldn't respond appropriately. The professions of osteopathic, orthopedic, and physical therapy, they've been using muscle testing for years and years, but they have a very different kind of context in using muscle testing. They're testing the structure's ability to respond. Orthopedic testing is provocative by nature to check joints and ligaments. Physical therapists are looking at the ability for the muscle to recruit power and strength. What we're going to be doing with DNA is very different because first we have to discern, can the nervous system respond? And if it can't, why can't it? And so that means that our muscle testing is more of a movement assessment. And because of the nature of kinetic chains, we really can't test an individual muscle. We can approximate, and we can use our position and force and vector and speed to target particular tissues. However, those tissues are going to be working in a greater context with more of the structure. The structure has to brace somewhere for that movement. And that bracing is either appropriate or it's inappropriate. And if it's inappropriate, then that's going to show that there is a compensation pattern, and our movement assessment will then qualify that there is indeed an issue with the nervous system responding inappropriately. There's a couple of things about DNA that's very, very different. And that is how we're going to be integrating muscle testing. First is we're going to learn how to very subtly communicate with the nervous system rather than testing structure. Structure comes after. First is the nervous system's ability to respond. We're gonna be using a methodology that I call hybrid muscle testing, which is a lot like a double-blind test, meaning that there are multiple tests for the same thing to get underneath the nervous system's response, because there's something it's a hidden dysfunction that's happening in all of our movement. And I call it functional dysfunctional movement. And what that means is that while we're able to accomplish a movement, there is still an underlying dysfunctional component. And we have to be able to discern that. We have to be able to weed that out. And so what hybrid muscle testing does, it's combining 4 aspects of this. One is the feedback loop has 2 aspects, our feed forward and feedback. They work in combination. And so the way that we engage our test and our assessment, we have to be able to incorporate both the feed forward and the feedback. The other mode is that there is direct muscle testing, which means that we can directly stimulate the structure to respond. And then there's indirect muscle testing, in which we indirectly stimulate the structure to respond. Then there's the client. The client is either using feed forward and they're initiating movement, or the client is responding to movement. And then the fourth is we're using a combination of a qualified indicator and direct muscle testing to see how the nervous system is responding to those other conditions. The great thing about hybrid muscle testing is that it can be utilized over a very broad spectrum. And there's a couple of basic rules to them that we'll have to flesh out during the DNA course, so that you get comfortable with the feeling of when you're moving from direct muscle testing to indirect, and feeling that seamless transition so that it becomes an effortless dance with your client. One of my coaches would say, pain is the last thing to show up and the first thing to leave. What that really is saying is that we have dysfunctional movement and we're not aware of it until the noci's volume goes up, and then, oh, something happened. Well, the reality is that something has been present there. It just hasn't been stimulated enough for it to get the nervous system's attention. And what we'll be doing with our hybrid movement assessment is stimulating the nervous system so that we can bring up those functional dysfunctional movement patterns. We're going to be using several skill sets so that we can complete the feedback loop. We're going to be using movement assessment. We're going to be engaging the client in movement assessment in such a way that they're having to respond. We're going to be looking for their compensations and remove those compensations, seeing how the nervous system responds. And then we're going to repattern those compensations with a new biomechanically correct pattern. And then we're going to re-challenge the system. Can the system, now that it's learned this new pattern, respond appropriately? Some of the ways that we're going to be utilizing this format is what I call the functional compass. Now, the functional compass is different than a standard muscle test where we're testing muscle A, muscle B, muscle C, and so forth. For example, the piriformis is a hip external rotator, and it also participates in hip flexion after the hip is flexed above 120 degrees. Though testing the piriformis itself would not give us the information that we need on how the joint is able to respond over that spectrum of movement. And so what we have to do is we have to look at that through the functional compass, which is basically a map of triplane mobility, meaning that our bodies, we move in spirals, we don't move linearly, we move in all three planes simultaneously. The kind of what I call the cream of the cream is what I call eccentric muscle testing. Now, when we're doing concentric muscle testing, what we're really doing is we're picking the low-lying fruit. Eccentric muscle testing is a much higher level movement assessment. What's happening in eccentric muscle testing is we're taking a movie over a big range of motion, rather than concentric is a snapshot of movement. And when we do that, much more dysfunction is going to show up within the patterning. And through our hybrid assessment, we'll be able to repattern all those components along that complete range of motion. There's going to be a couple of different roadmaps that we're going to be using in our assessment strategies. The first is the 5 primary kinetic chains, which I have the posters behind me. And that's the primary map. There's the master template, which are the 5 principal actions, which is how our breath, our shock absorption, and our ground force reaction create the dynamic platform so that we can store and release elastic energy. When we utilize this format of developing the dynamic platform, then the structure has the optimal ability to store and release elastic energy. And so then we can repattern that. However, if we go at it the opposite way and we treat the storing of releasing of elastic energy without having a platform in place, that platform that's not there is going to be causing dysfunctions that aren't going to allow us to have our optimal integration. There's a principle that's called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. What that says is we specifically adapt to our demand. How that applies to our movement assessment is, if there's a compensation pattern in the body that can be related to many different things, if we're not cueing in the nervous system to those relationships and we clear one relationship, that pattern can, 1, either come back, or 2, it's not going to resolve thoroughly because of all these other relationships, in the motor control center is going to remember those relationships. And so you have to take the pattern far enough apart so that it can fully integrate. And so we're going to be using the SAID principle a lot in investigating the different combinations, how the body is utilizing these compensation patterns. This is actually a very important thing. I did in my younger years, I did a lot of research in working with my clients and looking at their patterns and playing the game of, oh, here's a dysfunctional component. Let's clear that. Let's see what happens. Oh, well, now that dysfunctional component is showing up in an entirely different pattern. And I came to the realization of that it's not because that the correction of that first dysfunctional component in one pattern, it's that I didn't cue in the whole. And that's when I started looking at using feed-forward assessment so that the nervous system can take advantage of their compensation patterns so that they can show up. That's like a very important thing. And then two is that I want to globally cue in as much as the dysfunctional pattern as I can. I want to get all the relationships at once. The brain has enormous capacity. We don't have to just do one correction at a time. We can do a huge amount of assessment work and then with laser focus do one correction and it affects everything. And when you can do one or two corrections and affecting the complete movement pattern, you're doing a great, great service. The last thing I wanted to talk about was something that I call global, local, global. And that is, it's a pattern of assessment. And it's very different than the local, global, local pattern. The local, global, local would be like a client comes in and says, oh, I have a problem here with my elbow. And then you would, you would assess the functions of the elbow. That would be a local assessment. And then you'd go back and have them check, oh, now does the elbow hurt doing in the activities that you do? You know, whether it be rowing, whether it be lifting weights, whether it be gardening, even just walking. Global, local, global is much different. We want to look at the global movement patterns first. What that does is that's going to cue in much more of the movement patterns. Then we're going to look at what are the local contributions to that movement pattern. We're going to repattern that, and then we'll go back to the global patterns. How did the global patterns change with that interaction? And when we look at it from the global, local, global, what we'll find is that you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, when you're doing your corrections. And the idea is, what we want to do is we want to find what's the holy grail here. What's the big shortcut where we can help our clients get the most benefit from the intervention that we're giving them. Yeah.
Awesome. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Please.
Okay, so my first question to you is, do you have an example of maybe a client or a time that you really found DNA to be helpful in their specific case? And if you could share anything like that.
Yes, I have a client that's a world-class kayaker. And he participates in endurance racing. And when he comes to me, he's got issues that are impeding him from competing. And so what I do is I actually have him bring his boat, and I test him directly in his boat. And then I test him standing, seated, and laying on the table. And so I'm getting all this information about his environment as he's moving, so that when I'm doing any corrections, I can go back to all these different positions and see how that correction or how that dysfunction was affecting that. And then with just a few simple changes, all of a sudden his paddle is completely different.
Very cool. And then my last question for you is what's the format of the seminar going to be? Are you going to be like talking the whole time? Are people going to be practicing? What do the days kind of look like?
Well, hopefully I will be talking very little and we'll be doing lots of hands-on. We're going to be doing lots of movement work. And the reason why we're going to be doing lots of movement work is because I want to inform the progression of how we take someone that's injured to being a fully functioning athlete. That's a really important thing, is having that progression. And then also within those progressions are encoded feed-forward assessment skills. And so we're going to be doing movement breakouts. We're going to be having table assessment work, where we're going to be going through the 5 essential skills, and we're going to be integrating those with the 5 primary kinetic chains as a roadmap. And we'll be having lots of hands-on work, so everybody's going to get to experience that. One of the things that I've noticed in workshops that I've been to is that there's the demo time, and then there's the breakout time, but not every student is participating in the breakout. There's the students that are the observers. And I think that that's a real challenge, because you can observe something but not have the kinesthetic input or getting the input from your colleagues on what you're actually doing. And so I'm going to make sure that everybody gets a chance to actually employ the assessment strategies that I'm going to be showing.
Cool. And then I think this is my last question, but there's other modalities out there. Is there anything in just a sentence or two that you really feel like the DNA seminar is bringing to the table that's a little bit different than other workshops out there being offered?
Yeah, it's the way that the movement assessment is integrated, meaning that the way that we're integrating both feed forward and feedback work, the way that we're using the muscle testing as a communication with the nervous system, the way that we're getting to what I call the holy grail, which is eccentric movement assessment. Once we get a client to being able to have the dynamic stability to eccentrically stabilize over the course of range of motion, then they have full capacity to respond to the movement environment. A lot of the muscle tests are focusing on concentric testing strategies. And that is a great starting point. There's a whole lot more going on, and that's what I want to share, is that next level of assessment skills.
Very cool. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for sharing. And is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I look forward to seeing you all in the seminars, and we're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be some challenging movement work. So be prepared to allow yourself to feel that, oh, here is a place in my body and I'm not able to access. And that's where the gold is.
Very cool. And then I think that you had mentioned that there's a DNA manual that'll go along with the seminar, and also you'll be creating a private group on Facebook or some modality in which students and you can continue the conversation, correct, as a part of the registration fee?
Yeah, I really feel that I want to be able to support all the participants of DNA, and that people that are interested in the 5 primary kinetic chains. And so I'll be creating a support group that will allow you to bring your questions, and I will be engaged in and assisting you in the process of integrating and learning this material. And it's not like it's going to be like a one-off thing where you're going to be on your own. You take the workshop, and you've got community to help you, but you're basically on your own. But I want to be active in the process of developing the skills to the next level for you.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.